All right. Good evening out there, Facebook, YouTube, and podcast listeners. This is Chris from the Common Grounds podcast and more tonight from Roasters Marketplace. Because tonight, what we're doing is we're talking about picking your coffee, how to pick the best coffee for what you're looking for. We're going to get into origins a little bit. We're going to get into some different lingo in the industry. But mainly we're going to focus on how to go out there and find that perfect coffee for if you're just starting this journey, or if you're looking at something on the website or somewhere else, or you're at a farmer's market, how to pick a coffee, what those terms on the bag mean, what flavors are you looking at. And it's not just going to be me. We're bringing back our favorite guest, Emily Smith from Novus Coffee Imports. She's already in the green room waiting on us. So thanks for tuning in tonight. Hope you enjoy the show. If you're listening to this later on down the road, we appreciate it. The show's brought to you by roastersmarketplace.com. 24 roasters at this point, fixing to be 30 in the next short days. We just rolled out a new updated theme to our website. We've got a bunch of new options on the menu. Really, really cool. All right, we're going to kick this show off and roll into it with some Dom Coors. Hey, Emily, how are you tonight?
I'm great. How are you?
Good to see you again. Good. We're it's summertime now in Texas. I think we hit almost 90 degrees today before our first big thunderstorm came through. So me and the babies were in the pool this afternoon enjoying the sun and heat. What about up in Portland?
We are rainy. We are in our typical so Oregon has this time where it's like you're in spring, and spring is just rainy, and then you get false summer, like it's like a fake summer. We'll get like a week of really nice weather, and everybody thinks it's here, summer's here, and then just rain. So we're in the second bout of rainy spring, but yeah. It's good, I guess.
Last week when I was talking to Westy from Mall Grab, he was sitting outside there in Portland, and it was beautiful. He's like, I don't get to do this often, so I'm taking advantage of it now.
That was fake summer. That's the fake summer. So we're back into rain all the time. It's this little bit that we get that helps us to stay motivated. That the rain won't last forever. So it's a little teaser of what summer could be like.
Awesome. I'm posting up a comment here about questions, and we'll get this going. So tell me a little bit about how you pick coffee. That's what I want to know first. Tell me how Emily picks a coffee.
So I'm tough. I'm tough with coffee because I know a lot of people who want to give me coffee all the time. I feel like I always have an abundance of riches with coffee, and then I've got to kind of narrow it down to what I'm actually going to open up and brew and drink. I can only drink so much. So I usually just I like really basic coffees. For just drinking at home, always super basic stuff. When I go out to a cafe, it's a totally different story. I love at a cafe to try a small cup of something interesting, a new origin or a really cool processing method. But as far as like when I'm going to bring home, it's usually something that's super sweet, nutty. I've been loving this Nicaraguan coffee that I've been drinking. And it's like cocoa nib and hazelnut, walnut. It's so good. And I've said this before, but I have like my secret creamer that I put in.
Right.
Not Cinnamon Toast Crunch anymore. I've moved on to a slightly healthier addition to my coffee, but I do add a little bit of something to my coffee. So I go for coffees at home that are complementary to how I'm gonna drink it.
So as it could say, I'm going to play Mr. Consumer here.
Yeah.
And I've typically been buying coffee at the grocery store out of the bins, and I might not have ever got fresh roasted coffee before. And I have the opportunity to get fresh roasted coffee.
Yeah.
I use a drip coffee maker, and I do have a grinder. It's just a small bird grinder, and I like coffee that tastes like coffee. When you ask me what I want coffee that tastes like coffee. So how would we approach that one?
So I can't let it go without pointing it out. Let's talk about the bins at the grocery store. Bins can be a little bit problematic. So I know that there are great roasters who have coffee in bins at awesome grocery stores, and they are well stocked and they are rotated through. I feel like that's not typically how it's done. Oftentimes that coffee sits there being exposed to light. And one thing to know about coffee is that coffee naturally has lipids, fats, oils inside the bean. It's part of the actual structure of the bean. It is part of the roasting process, how the roaster manipulates those. At a certain point in the roasting process, those the bean actually those fats and oils. Not to say that there's like grams of fat; it's the oils, right? So the oils actually migrate to the surface of the bean, which is where you start to see oil on or shininess on dark roasted coffee. So when you have those bins at the grocery store, those bins are exposed to light, and if you cook, you know that oil exposed to light, it's not a good thing. It makes the oils go rancid, right? So think about your grocery store. You've got a 16-year-old kid who's restocking the coffee. Is he wiping the bins down to make sure that there's no rancid oils on the coffee? Probably not. Is he making sure that everything's dated so that you're FIFOing through all of the coffee so it's not just going rancid in the bin?
First in, first out.
Yep. He's probably not doing that. Yeah. He's probably just like ripping open the bag and tossing it in. So I think those bins, first of all, can be kind of problematic. I always try to steer people away from coffee in the bins. Even if you find that even if you just go for the same coffee, but you just get it in a bag, it will be of a higher quality because it's in the bag. So that's the first thing I would just kind of call out on that. When you are somebody who likes coffee that tastes like coffee, to me that says medium roast is something in the middle. Like it's kind of a medium of everything, right? Medium roast, medium acidity. Everything is pretty neutral. I feel like that's that classic coffee tastes like coffee sort of descriptor. There are a couple of origin countries that do that. There are a lot of roasters who craft a house blend exactly for that purpose, to balance everything out and bring the customer coffee that tastes like coffee. So I think if you just try to stick to the middle, a house blend, if you try to go for a medium roasted coffee that would be from Brazil, would be a really safe bet. Peru would be a really safe bet. Vietnam, Mexico, all of those are, to me, coffees that taste like coffee. Some chocolate, some vanilla, maybe some caramel notes, nothing crazy. Kind of those, honestly, it's like the typical flavors that you would find in like with the coffee creamers, right? Like those flavored coffee creamers are really designed to pull out the natural flavors that are in coffee. They're made to pair with coffee really well. That's why even though maybe strawberry shortcake's a really yummy dessert, you don't see strawberry shortcake creamer in the creamer section because it doesn't pair well with the flavors of coffee. So anything that you see in the coffee creamer section, those are some really good basic tasting notes. And sometimes you'll see tasting notes on the bag that may or may not resonate with you. But if you go for a house blend, if you go for something that it identifies itself as a medium roast, you're probably in a good spot. If you see anything from Brazil, Vietnam, Mexico, or Peru, those are probably going to be some solid coffees that taste like coffee for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So one thing in there, when you're looking at that, when you're looking at brew method, so does how I'm brewing the coffee matter to what choice I'm making for coffee?
Sure. So I think that there are brew methods which elevate some of the what I would call like top notes of the coffee, some of the more complex, delicate flavors of a coffee. And there are brew methods that brew coffee, but they almost kind of homogenize those flavor notes based on how on the methodology. Like you're not going to get as much complexity out of it. Like your coffee pot may not have as much complexity out of it. Whereas if you're doing if you're a pour over person and you're doing a Hario pour over or something like that, you're probably looking for more complexity. So I think your brew method could a little bit determine or at least give you a little insight as to how much complexity you want to see out of that coffee.
And I just posted a link in the comments. I'm sorry that I post almost probably 2 or 3 times a day. I might post that link, and it's to the SCA certified home brewer page, to where it lists the home brewers that are certified by the SCA that hits the right proper water temperature at the right speed at the right times. And those coffee pots will give you a better cup of coffee than anything else on the market. Some of them are pricey, but some of them are very affordable.
And with those, I mean, the pricey coffee brewers to the not so pricey coffee brewers, you can just determine how much that those little bits, those little extra point here, extra point there of quality are meaningful to you in your normal day. But I think that, for the brew method, I would say the only ones that sometimes are slightly confusing to me, just a little confusing, but people who do really dark roasts on something that maybe a Chemex, where it's very easy on a Chemex to pull out a lot of those maybe extra extract some of those extra bitter qualities. Like you have to be really I feel like you have to be kind of more precise on it. Mm-hmm. And so I always feel like dark roast lends itself really well to something that is more of a time extraction, like a immersion brew, like a French press, or even a clever dripper a little bit. But whatever your brew method is, I think having quality coffee, you'll still get a good cup out of it.
And it's much easier to control that quality cup.
Yeah.
It is. I've got I'm really been going into the mediums and lights, and then I had some roasters send me some darks, and I mean it's total opposite end of the spectrum of what I've been doing, and now I'm able to say, okay, I'm dropping my water temperature.
Yep.
I'm going to increase my grind size, and I'm actually going to decrease how much coffee I'm putting in there.
Mhm.
And I've brewed a weaker cup, if you want to say weaker,
Yep.
but it's better. It's really good, and that's a
Yeah.
way to.
And so that's definitely where dark roasts lend themselves to being brewed on maybe a lower end automatic brewer, right? Something that doesn't get quite to the temperature that you want it to get to. So that's great. Like if you're a dark roast person, I say go for it. Do that. Do a French press. If you are a light roast, if you want to experience some real flavor complexities, I would say think about maybe trying a coffee on a Chemex. But the big point is that you enjoy the cup of coffee that you have. And if brewing coffee is not your hobby, and it's totally cool, like there are a lot of people who enjoy drinking coffee that don't really enjoy the process of brewing coffee, right? So they
Right.
might be people who more frequently go to a cafe and pick up a cup of coffee, and that's okay. There are people who love good food and don't enjoy cooking. It's totally fine to have that. And those people might, if you're an everyday, I go to the cafe and grab a cup of drip type of person, it might be worth it to invest in a little bit nicer of a coffee pot and an automatic brewer and brew some really great coffee out of it.
I'm going to have to ask you to move your microphone just a little bit.
Sorry.
Getting the zipper running up
Oh,
against
I'm
it. It's
sorry.
okay. No, you're good. You're good. You can just set it down in your collar and you'll be good. Right there. You just drop it right down in your shirt. There we go.
I don't know. I'm gonna go like that.
Yeah, it'll work. It'll work.
Okay.
Thank you. So if I'm looking for maybe something more complex, now I've got into coffee. I might not necessarily need help, exploring it, but maybe I want to move from that breakfast blend or that blend. Maybe I want to explore something, and maybe I want to explore something on the more fruity side. So what would I be looking at? Not necessarily origin wise, but process wise, or maybe origin wise too.
Well, I think the first thing to introduce, if you are a basic coffee blend type of person, I think the first thing to bring up is the difference between a blend and a single origin coffee. So if you're accustomed to getting a house blend, to getting any kind of coffee that has a really cool name on it, it's probably a blend. And that has been had an artisan coffee roaster who has crafted that. So the next area would be to explore some single origin coffees. And what a single origin coffee is that rather than being defined in tasting notes by a craftsman coffee roaster, it's defined in tasting notes by the terroir or by the place where that coffee was grown, was harvested. So that's what defines how that coffee is going to taste. And it's a very different sort of, it can be a very different sort of experience for somebody. Just like getting into wine and all of a sudden exploring these different regions and exploring what wine has to offer between different locations and I'm not a wine person. I live in wine country, and I know that there's like a difference between Oregon Pinot and something in California. Coffee is exactly the same way. So once you get into single origin coffees, you want to be thinking about it more in terms of terroir, in terms of flavors that are just, there's a lot of unique qualities to it. So it's a kind of a different realm. And this is where you might start experiencing some coffee that doesn't taste like coffee, largely.
So a single origin might not necessarily mean one farm. It could mean one region or one collective of farmers or one even country, correct?
I think the best way to think of a single origin coffee is It is a coffee that is traceable to a place, whereas a blend is multiple coffees put together. A single origin coffee is traceable to a place. Qualities in the coffee are really taken from a location. So with that, you're going to see characteristics that are they represent a location. There is a classic flavor profile for the Antigua region of Guatemala because of the soil, the microclimate where the beans are grown, the way in which the beans are harvested and processed. All of those things influence the way flavors develop in this region. And unless a farmer has some sort of intervention to change one of those, like which they could do, but for the most part, your Guatemala Antigua coffees are going to have a very characteristic flavor profile that is the Antigua region of Guatemala. And that's a really cool thing to explore and discover, because then you start looking at coffee and seeing coffee as a representation of a place. And I think that that's a whole nother way to connect to coffee, to explore coffee as a representation of a place rather than just as something that is a spot on a grocery store shelf.
And that's one of the conversations we had earlier today when we were talking about the show is, how I pick coffee at this point is how I had something from that region or that country yet. And so I've got my list is continuing to shrink of coffees that I haven't had. And we were talking about Burundi, and I've got some coming from me for that, Vietnam. And, I need to get some Kona because I've had Kona from the grocery store, but there might have been one bean in that bag probably that was from Kona.
Yeah, your typical, so because of the way those island coffees are, Kona in the States, if you pay under $60 a pound, you're not getting 100% Kona. 100% Kona should be somewhere around at least $40 a pound. To get it green, it costs like almost $30 a pound without having anything else, any other inputs into it. So if it's affordable to you, if you drink it every morning, it's not really Kona. It's just blended with things that it's like a 5% blend in the States. Jamaican Blue Mountain is a 1% blend in the States. So it's 99% something else that's nice.
Yeah, I think the Kona I have on the website from Evansville is $25 for 8 ounces.
Which is an absolutely appropriate pricing for a Kona. And so, there's a lot of interesting places definitely to get coffee from. But even if you go and explore all of these countries, then you start to get into the micro regions within the countries, which is super cool. Like in Colombia, for instance, Colombia, not only does Colombia have all these different micro regions, Colombia has multiple harvests each year. So there's micro regions that actually harvest at different times, and you have completely different coffee from the north end of Colombia to the south. So there's coffee from areas like Medellin, Tolima. We had some from Boyacá. Nariño is totally different from a Tolima in almost every manner. So there's all of these micro regions within a single country. If your coffee is just given a name of a country, it represents maybe a classic profile. So if you have been drinking coffee, or you have a coffee and it's a Colombia, and all you know about it is that it's a Colombia and you really enjoyed it, I would say find another coffee that's a Colombia, and it'll have a lot of similar characteristics to it. If you're when you get certain countries are super crazy with the amount of diversity that you can get in the cup. So for instance, so we talked about Colombia a little bit with the different diversity. Even beyond that, man, Ethiopia, like coffee diversity in Ethiopia, it's insane. The amount of
2,000 subspecies or something ridiculous.
yeah, and not only that, but you have these regions that have very, very distinct. So I also want to say when I say cup profile, what I'm talking about is like it's like the classic flavors of that area. You could think of the difference between like different apple varieties as kind of the way that coffee can have some differences. In Ethiopia, instead of differences between apple varieties, you're like differences between an entire fruit basket. Like you have the range of diversity in flavors and experiences with those coffees is so vast, and you'll get some really interesting things. It's hard to have a similar Ethiopian coffee experience over and over again because there's just so much really good coffee coming out of Ethiopia that tastes like all over the place, just really crazy flavors. It's so fun. If you're an adventurous type, just get Ethiopian coffees. If you get Ethiopian coffees from different roasters and you just keep trying Ethiopian coffees, you will have a different experience with every bag. I can almost guarantee it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say it's a great country to explore if you are into new experiences. If you want to try new flavors, just stick to Ethiopia for a while. You'll have the whole gamut of them.
That's one of the things that we're working on. I'm working on the website right now. I actually went in and plugged in every coffee producing country 2 nights ago, so I can actually categorize everybody into exact countries. So now you can actually go in and say, I want to search specifically every coffee on this website from Burundi.
Right.
and just click, and you're there. And Ethiopia, I think, is going to be like my crown jewel of, okay, this is from the Sedimo wash station.
Yep.
And these are the 7 coffees from there that all, because nobody really, I mean, some roasters do it, but they don't have, they have 1 coffee from there and they talk about the wash station. Well, I'm going to have 14 coffees from there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about, hey, this is all of these.
Yeah. And I think that it's so Ethiopia is also a really great segue into the diverse. So we've talked about, okay, you have blends versus single origins, and then you have single origins where you dig a little deeper, and then you're into like these micro regions that you can find really fun coffees from. So you have diversity within a single origin. I think that's a really great segue to then talk about processing methods and how different processing methods, for those people who don't know, it's a process to go from the fruit of the coffee, what we would call the coffee cherry, to the dried seed of the coffee that we refer to as the coffee bean. So it's not actually a bean. It's the seed within the fruit of the coffee cherry. And to get it to that process or to that point where it's dried so that it can then be roasted by a roaster, it has to go through multiple locations, oftentimes like multiple facilities where one facility handles taking all of the fruit off, and then another facility might handle all of the drying and finishing preparation. There's also a lot of variation. There's variation in time and in temperature. There's so much science right now that's being done around processing and changing and modifying coffee at that processing level. Like, it'll make your mind go crazy to hear some of the work that they are doing. And a lot of that work is being driven out of necessity by changes in climate that are making traditional processing methods more risky, because there's more potential of bacteria, or there's more potential of some sort of undesirable element developing on the coffee as far as like a flavor, because of changes in water access, changes in heat, humidity through the whole process. It takes a lot of control, and due to changes in climate at origin countries, what the environment's like as far as temperature and humidity, now that has a lot of variation in it. And because of that variation, coffee farmers have gotten very, very good at problem solving and getting creative and coming up with new ways to process coffee to get the highest quality product out of it. What's super cool about that as a consumer, so you don't need to dig into all of the nerdy stuff. I mean, if you want to, you can. There's plenty of
There's
nerdy.
plenty.
There's plenty.
It's super cool. It's super cool if you want to get into, the difference between red honey processed and black honey processed and yellow and washed.
And that's not even touching on microbial action. I have a friend who works for a company, and he does yeast fermentation on the coffees, and travels around to origin countries to supervise the implementation of like controlled microbes within the coffee processing.
So cool.
I always tell him, like, you're way too smart for me to hang out with you. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. You're really smart. But there's really cool things that are happening to coffee. But as a consumer, I think one thing that's what the takeaway would be is that coffee goes through many different processes of how it ends up to a roaster, from when it's picked to getting to the coffee roaster. And you'll see that those processes will get identified oftentimes on the coffee bags. And so just a couple of really easy like ways to look at that would be that you'll see washed as a very common way to talk about coffee. That means that a good amount of water was used to clean the coffee, and it went through and it was done quickly. So the time that coffee sits from being processed to going through the whole from being picked to going through the processing, there are a lot of, that's the time when all the crazy stuff can happen with fermentation and microbial development. So washed coffee goes through that quickly, and they use water to do that. Okay. You'll find that very commonly on coffees grown in like Central America, because there's a larger access to water. And those coffees, if it's washed, it tends to have what we would consider like a clean flavor. It has usually a crisper acidity to it. It might have more qualities of, I would describe it more as like, it'll have some qualities of like a fine dark chocolate. So you might see those really nice chocolatey notes that you find in like really high-end dark chocolate, where it's almost, and it's got a little bit of fruit character to it. Washed coffees might have fruit character that's more like citrus fruits instead of berries or melon. So a little bit more like that. Another way that coffee can go through a processing method, anything that is labeled as honey, that just means that during that processing method, they did use water. It took a little bit longer to do. And the farmer or whoever was processing the coffee was controlling the amount of fermentation that was happening on that coffee. So it's a lighter amount of fermentation they do a lot. It's really cool. They do a lot with like measuring the Brix and the sugar development in the coffee to see how that's all how it's all going. But that coffee, because there's a little bit of this fermentation on it, and it actually, in the processing method, it has this like sticky honey stuff that they leave. We call it mucilage. It gets left on the coffee and dried onto the coffee like that, and it's sweet. It honestly, it tastes like honey smacks. Like there's a reason they call it honey process. It's really sweet. Those coffees will probably be a little bit sweeter, and they're going to have a little bit more of maybe some of the characteristics that you would find with dried fruits, maybe some more tropical fruit kind of notes. They're less chocolate and nutty character usually. Something very interesting though, and typically fairly sweet. The other side of that, the other extreme from washed, is what we would call natural process. And a natural process means that coffee was picked, and then the cherry was actually left on the seed and dried in that way, and then kind of cracked off of the seed when at the end of this drying process. And what happens is that coffee seeds are actually they're porous, so they absorb what they're soaked in. So it's like you're soaking it in this fermenting kind of fruit. And if you do that in the right way and at the right temperature, what you get is a set of flavors that are very sweet, very fruit, berry sort of forward, oftentimes jammy, like strawberry jam or blueberry jam, very, very sweet fruit forward flavors, and typically a lower acidity with those types of coffee. So that's kind of the different processing methods that you might see on a coffee that around the world. Places that have less access to water are probably going to have more coffees that are processed in a natural way, because they're using sun to process the coffee instead of using water as a resource to process the coffee. So a lot of it's out of kind of the necessity for the farmer.
That's pretty neat.
A lot of info there.
No, it's really interesting to get into and look at, and just see the fact that this farm, and I know from speaking to some farmers and some different origin people that the coffee that they grow up on top of the mountain, they naturally process it because they don't want to carry it down to the bottom because it's too heavy, and they don't want to carry water up to it. And so just even within a micro region and a microclimate like that, you have different processing methods that lend themselves to whatever they have access to. There's no water at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
So they're going to dry it. That's really cool, because you would have never thought of it has to do with, well, what do I want to carry down on my back?
Yeah. And the other thing to think about or to know is that oftentimes farms, when they have a really nice quality coffee, they might process it in multiple methods. So in areas like Costa Rica, you have a lot of, and Colombia, you have a lot of large mills where people bring their coffee to get processed, and it's easily they're dotted all throughout the country, and they're easily accessible by car, like within a day's, a couple hours drive. Ooh, we've got a swimming beauty.
Yes, Charlie's here.
Hi, Charlie.
Where's your mama?
Mommy's taking a shower.
No, I don't think mommy's taking a shower. What are you doing in here? Can you say hi, everybody?
Hi.
Go back to mom and close the door, please.
So you have in more developed countries that have more access, have more infrastructure, you have these like processing like processing mills all over the place where people can bring their coffee to get it processed. And then sometimes in more remote areas, which sometimes are the remote areas are the places that grow the best coffee, right? Like super high altitude, kind of like tucked away. A lot of times in these remote areas, the farmer themselves do a certain amount of the processing. And so that's where you get these, you can find farmers who they're like chefs. They're so creative about how they want to express their coffee and how they control the processing. And they also recognize that if they do it really well, it adds a lot of value to their coffee. So they can sell it sometimes for twice what they would have been able to sell it for before. But it's risky for the farmer, just so people understand this, why every farmer doesn't do this. It's very risky for the farmer because if that does not go well, and there are so many control, like things that could go wrong with temperature, water quality, all of that can mess up the processing. If it goes wrong, that farmer could lose their entire crop of their best coffee. So sometimes I hear people say, well, why doesn't every farmer just do all these cool processing methods? And it's just not realistic. So you do sometimes find a farmer who's willing to take that risk. You'll also probably find that those coffees with really fun experimental processing methods are considerably more expensive. And that really reflects the risk that was put in at every spot on the supply chain to bring that coffee over. So just, I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind, that those expensive coffees are expensive for a reason. Like they took a lot of risk to make them happen. So
even risk at the roaster level. I mean, don't burn it. Don't burn. Don't, what's the most expensive batch of coffee that you've burned, Emily?
That I've burned? I don't burn coffee. No.
Never.
No, never. I'm trying to think of for roast. No. I do have a thought. I didn't burn it, but probably the most nervous I ever was I often work as a sample roaster for hire for people to sample roast up coffees. And so it's a coffee that usually it's a coffee I've never roasted before. I'm only given maybe 100 grams of that coffee, maybe 200 grams. And usually it's for some sort of important thing that's happening. So somebody's passing through town and they're having this big event, and this coffee has to be perfect. So
so they call Emily in.
So I go in and roast. And probably the one that was the craziest was I roasted a set of coffees that were grown in California. And I think the sample alone was like $200 or like $20 for 20 grams of coffee, which is definitely the most expensive I've ever roasted. And it was the weirdest coffee I've ever roasted. Like it behaved extremely strange in the roaster. And so it made me really nervous because I thought there's a really good chance I'm going to mess this coffee up. It's going to be terrible. But I don't know. I don't even know how it tasted.
And that's the only coffee that's grown currently in North America in a non-controlled, well, it is still a controlled environment, but an outdoor farm in Southern California that's in just like this micro climate, right?
And it's super bonkers in the roaster, but I don't know how it tastes. But as a roaster, it was weird, and I would never get that coffee because I would be terrified to roast it. But yeah, so processing methods are cool. Origins are really cool ways to explore coffee if you're getting adventurous. If you're not the adventurous type and you just like to drink a coffee that you enjoy and you don't want to experience anything that's kind of crazy, which is totally okay because that's me. When I have my morning coffee, I'm really not going for something that's strange or different. So if you'd like to have that kind of experience where it's coffee, it's delicious, but maybe it's not crazy and weird and have any funky flavors that you might find. If that's your thing, then go with it. Like, find a great roaster, find a coffee that makes you feel good, and drink all day.
So what about if I go out and I'm like, you know what, I want an organic, fair trade, direct trade coffee. Let's talk about the first term, organic.
Yeah. Well,
so tell me about organic coffee.
So whenever I have a interact with somebody who asks me where they can get a good organic coffee, my question to them is always, why do you want an organic coffee? Okay. So when somebody is talking about their desire for an organic coffee, typically I think it kind of falls into two categories. One is that they are looking for a coffee that has some sort of added health benefits that they think they're going to get through being organic. Or two, they're looking for a coffee that they're looking for something that has been certified in such a way that they feel good about the environmental impacts that coffee had, right? They want something that has like minimal negative impact on the coffee growing region. And that's those are great things. When people talk about fair trade, they're usually like, that to me is a signal that they want something that has a component of social responsibility along with it. So if those are important to you, I think it's really good to just learn a little bit about what that really means in a tangible way. So for coffee, we talked about how the coffee bean itself is the seed inside the plant. There is a almost undetectable amount of any sort of contamination that can happen to that coffee seed when if some sort of chemical is used on the entire plant itself. So through the whole processing method of it being washed, cleaned, all of the pulp stripped off of it, where any sort of residue would be on the skin, right? The flesh or the skin of the coffee cherry, which is not what you're consuming. You're consuming the seed at the very middle. So right away, as far as health benefits go, you're really not looking at any sort of amount of problematic chemical. If you are buying coffee from, if the coffee is coming off of a farm that is a responsible farm, it's quite possible, it's actually most likely that coffee is not organic certified. And the reason for that is that in order to get an organic certification, they have to abstain from having chemicals on the farm that are used for mitigating fungus, bugs, anything like that. If you've followed coffee for a while, you may have heard that there have been some real issues in the past few years because of climate change with problems with something called coffee leaf rust, which has decimated entire farms and entire growing regions. There's also issues with coffee little bugs that bore in to the seeds and ruin them. When a farmer who's a good farmer, they're very attentive of their crops, and they see something happening. Farmers want to have access to some sort of spot treatment because they want to spot treat a small amount of, it might be a couple of plants on their, or a small little area of their farm, so that it doesn't spread to their farm. And most likely, it's not just their farm that they're concerned about, but if it spreads to their farm, it's also going to spread to their neighbors' farms. And because of that, they're very concerned about making sure that their farm is healthy and that also their community is well taken care of. So having the ability to spot treat those problems is actually really important to the sustainability of healthy coffee farms. So and you can't have that if you're organic certified, which is why in areas where there's a lot of organic coffee grown, those farms are the most susceptible to being devastated by coffee leaf rust or any other sort of problem, agronomy problem. So it's really challenging. It's also really challenging that a neighbor using the products and wind blows the product over onto, and when I say product like a chemical, blows the chemical over onto their farm, can jeopardize their organic certification. So that's an issue. And the other thing with certifications can be that certifications require money. So they require a skill set of record keeping. They also require paying an organization that manages the certification, and they require paying to have an auditor come and to make sure that they're compliant with all of the rules. So the certification really, to me, it's often a representation of compliance to a set of rules, that they were compliant when the auditor came and they were able to keep all their paperwork taken care of. But if I see that a farm's organic certified, I don't know that that farm's healthy. I don't know that the community is well taken care of. To me, what I do, if I hear about a farm being organic certified, my question is really, why? Is it just for market access so that they can sell organic coffee? And then the other question is, if they're growing good coffee, is it really necessary for them to maintain the organic certification? Because in a lot of ways, and a lot of times, it's more of a burden to the farmer financially, and more risky to grow a farm in that manner during climate change and everything. So if somebody's really interested in organic certification, maybe they would be really interested in learning more about the farm and learning what kind of practices are used on the farm. There are other certifications that reflect a more holistic way of growing coffee. So Rainforest Alliance, or OOTS certification, that means that yes, you can have a little bit of spot treatment on your farm with chemicals, but you have proper storage, sanitation of all of these chemicals. They're being properly applied. People who are applying the chemicals are safe and protected. Rainforest Alliance certification also means that you're doing other things that promote a healthy environment on your farm. So you maybe have some shade trees, you have protections for different sorts of wildlife, and those are things that make you have a healthy farm. So if you're concerned about environmental impact, you might look at Rainforest Alliance certification as something that could be really of a value add to you, that give you a little bit of assurance. It's also a lot easier for a farmer to get that sort of certification. It's less burden for them. So that could be something that would be really impactful for you. If you have a good relationship with your roaster can oftentimes tell you about what practices are happening on the farm. So if those things are important for you, ask about what practices happen on the farm to help the environment. Oftentimes a roaster has actually visited the farm, and they might have a report on their website, like an origin report, to give you an insight into how that farm is handling these different challenges. What are they seeing on the farm? And that could give you steer you in the right direction of a coffee that ethically you feel really good about.
It's a lot of fun to know that, you can go on and see who the farmer was on some of the coffees. Like there's
Yeah.
pictures. I've literally got pictures of the guys
Yeah.
farming the coffee on the
So
website, and it's so interesting to get into.
that's a project we're also working with. We have a program called Lift, which is not a certification program at all. It's not about compliance. It's about access to resources and making sure that farmers have the resources, the skill set to do to have healthy farms, to have healthy communities, to grow good coffee, and to have market access for that coffee. So our program with Lyft, you would never see you're not going to see it on a certification or anything like that. But we actually have an app where a person can go on, or the roaster can go on and get information about the farm, and they can actually see that what's happening on that farm, how's that farmer doing in their trainings, how are they performing with like the key metrics. They can see like what's happening with the schools that are in the area, to see what access they have and what kind of stuff that the school projects are doing. So
Yeah, a lot of people, if they've never been to a third world country, have no idea the challenges that these farmers, and I've never been to a coffee farm, but I have been to some pretty rough areas of the world.
yeah,
And it's just, like, oh, this is the first time that we've ever had clean running water. You're like,
yeah,
like I won't drink my tap water at home, and they're getting fresh water for the first time in their lives. It's such a neat program. Will from he commented up here, best certifications explanation I've ever heard. So excellent job on that, Emily. What about when they talk about direct trade, or I mean, you work for Novus Coffee. Y'all import coffee. So
yeah.
how many do y'all buy the coffee and then sell it to the roasters? Is that how your process works?
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. So I've mentioned a couple times, just a little bit, that there's a lot of risk that's involved in the supply chain with coffee, right? It's anytime you import or export anything, it involves a lot of different people who are experts in different fields of logistics and moving coffee, and like all of the steps to make sure that nothing happens, because each container of coffee is worth a lot of money, especially when we talk about these like really nice micro lots of coffee. So it's a lot of work and a lot of risk that goes into moving coffee, and that's what a coffee importer does. Is we manage that risk, and we we take on all of that risk so that the roaster is not assuming it, or the farmer, and we make sure that it's done properly. We are experts in export, right? We are experts in moving that coffee and helping it to become available to the roasters. So that's kind of our game. We are experts in moving the coffee, and then we play matchmaker to the coffee roaster and help them find like the coffee of their dreams that they want to have be in a long-term relationship with.
It's a pretty cool process when you think about the steps that coffee takes to get here, and then the steps that you can go into and narrow it down to find out that this bag of coffee was grown by Luis in Chiapas, Mexico, and it was brought in by your company, and it's only been, we know exactly, we can trace the origin, like you said. And and that typically means that the farmer's getting the best price that he can get without selling it somehow directly to the roaster, which most of the farmers aren't able to do.
I mean, because honestly, there's benefits that come from working for a farmer, from working with an importer. We take on that risk for moving the coffee, finding the roaster, Especially with micro lot coffee, if a farmer has 50 bags of really high quality micro lot coffee, that oftentimes means that they need multiple roasters to take that coffee on. Oftentimes, small roasters may only take a few bags of an entire lot, which is totally fine, but that would become very cumbersome for a farmer to try to manage how that coffee is going to get to the roasters, where it's going to be warehoused, all of the documentation to get that coffee shipped, managing all of the transaction financially, as well as once for farmers that we work with, we provide additional services, training through our Lift program. So it's all about access to services. We have a finance program, so we provide financing so that they can continue on working on the next crop of coffee, right? And as soon as before that coffee is even sold, that coffee might be at a warehouse over here and it's not sold, but the farmer needed that money when that coffee was harvested so that they can start working on the next crop year of coffee. And so that's kind of what we do, is we help to fill all of those gaps between the farmer and the roaster, and help both of them get the services that they need.
That's a lot that goes into finding the perfect cup of coffee.
Yes, from the beginning all the way to the end. And I would just say also, man, I like to tell people, because I feel like people, when they hear I work in coffee, they almost don't want to tell me what kind of coffee they drink. I would just say, drink coffee, drink it often, and feel good about the coffee you're drinking. Whenever anybody asks me, how do I pick the right kind of coffee? I always tell them, find a roaster that you trust and get coffee from somebody who you trust. And that's what I love about what you're doing with Roasters Marketplace, is you've got all of these really awesome roasters who are very careful about how they source coffee. So they do that job to make sure that coffee is quality, to make sure that coffee is something that you can feel good about. They work on their relationship with the farmer, and they're making sure the farmer is taken care of. And as long as you buy coffee from somebody like that, like, you're set. Like, just, it's going to be fine. It'll be a good experience. And you don't need to feel bad if you love a super dark roasted coffee that you get pre-ground. Like, there should not be any shame in coffee. Like, enjoy the coffee, drink it often, buy lots of it, buy from small roasters. It'll be great.
Emily, once again, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule and jumping on here with us. Really appreciate it. Next week, everybody who listened, thanks for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast, go ahead and give us a 4-star, 5-star rating on iTunes. If you're on Apple, if you're like me and not on Apple, don't worry about rating. It's just too hard to go in and do that. So I appreciate you listening. Emily, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next week, we will be interviewing the team from Project Buna, which is 2 active duty Navy guys in just outside of Washington, D.C. that do super, super awesome job on some really cool micro lots. They only do bags or half bags at a time that they buy. And so we'll be interviewing Mike and Donnie from Project Buna next Tuesday. So Emily, I hope you tune into that one and give us some.
I will. I'll be on there asking all the questions, listening in.
We appreciate it. You have a great night. And
okay.
I'll talk to you in the green room after this.
Thanks.
Thank you. And for everybody, check us out, roastersmarketplace.com. Thank you.